again, in defense of Russia taking over Kiev, there was a pro-Russian president of Ukraine, and thanks to NGOs and some purport American assistance, the Russian president was exiled into Russia, the pro-Russian president of Ukraine. And it was I think it was the Orange Revolution. And then the pro-Western president assumed duty. So in a way, the West was mucking around with Ukraine, promising membership in NATO, which Russia has said right from the beginning is a no-go. And it's an infringement on Russian nationality. So there's all sorts of red flags going up. And the West continued to ignore them. Ukraine continued to ignore them. And finally, with the administration in Washington, D.C. and the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, I think the signal was to Russia and their intelligence was greatly flawed. They thought they could move into Ukraine with all their military and take it over in a matter of days. And the Ukrainians wanted to have nothing to do with it. And there's no love lost between the Western Ukrainians and the Russians. Back in Stalin's day, millions of Ukrainians were starved during the Soviets' rule of collectivization of the farms. So the whole thing is a bloody mess. The Ukrainians have shown remarkable strength in resisting the Russians. Innovation, we now have a new way of fighting wars with drones and other types of weaponry that dramatically changed the thing. I mean, the Russian fleet now is hamstrung because of all the drone seafarers that the Ukrainians have developed. So it's a mess, but Ukraine could not survive without the United States. And the United States has sent in hundreds of billions of dollars to support Ukraine, and Western Europe has sent in billions and billions of dollars. And so what is the end game plan? For 3 years from 2022, the Ukrainians said, well, we're going to take back all our land. And the Russians have been saying, well, we're going to keep on going until we get rid of that fascist leadership in Kiev and make sure that they never join NATO, and we'll continue until we achieve our goals. And so the US has just been pumping in money with no clear articulation, in my opinion, as to what the goal was. And Trump gets elected and his goal is just to stop the fighting. Let's make a deal. And when I wrote the paper back in 2022, I said, there's no winner in this one. This is a bloody mess, literally speaking. And the only way to solve this thing is maybe have a Korea kind of truce where no one was happy. North Korea wasn't happy. South Korea wasn't happy. As a matter of fact, Eisenhower had to threaten the president of South Korea with all sorts of threats to make sure he agreed to the deal, because he didn't want to give in to the North Koreans because they did the invasion. But here we are all these years later, and South Korea and North Korea still exist. No one's dying. And though North Korea is a nightmare, South Korea has prospered greatly. So let's hope that they can make a deal along the lines of South Korea where the fighting stops and the two sides go to live in their own little world, and Russia can continue its downward slope of being a third world power with nuclear weapons, and the Ukraine can strengthen itself economically in the economy and the military, and get more aligned with the West. And Western Europe, because of Trump's action, is starting to talk about doing something about building up their own military so that they won't succumb to any Soviet kind of invasions. So, and the other no-go with Russia is concerned is no NATO for the Ukraine. And again, to me, that's not a big deal either. If the United States or Great Britain, Germany or France think that Ukraine is of paramount importance, then they should sign a separate deal outside of NATO, because there's members of NATO that will never agree to Ukraine coming in. So why fight the issue? Just make a separate deal. So let's hope that Putin agrees with the ceasefire and they make some sort of deal. And if they don't, I would assume that Trump will tighten up the screws and make Russia pay for it in more than one way to continue the fighting. And certainly one of the ways is to really increase American military aid. Just recently, Ukraine had a drone attack on Moscow. I could see a lot more of them coming if they don't make a deal. So that's my story.
Good points, Larry. And speaking about nuclear and the history you were talking about, going to the 1994 Budapest Memorandum that was signed between US, UK, Russia, and Ukraine for Ukraine to get rid of their nuclear weapons, join the non-proliferation agreement. And in exchange, Russia was not supposed to invade, recognize their sovereign territory. Of course, that did not happen. So there is mistrust there between Zelensky and Putin, obviously.
Yeah. Well, I think a general rule of thumb everybody should be aware of is you never trust a communist. I mean, we don't have to look any further than China for breaking all sorts of treaties too. So Russia breaking a treaty, Soviet Union, and never trust a communist. And the motto of American Security Council, peace through strength, is the way you enforce a peace is to make sure that they're not going to roll over you when they know that there's a real big stick waiting for them if they break the truce. Peace through strength is so apt today as it was 40 years ago during Reagan's era.
Yes, very good point to that.
Yeah.
And I think that there's going to be have to be concessions on both sides for this to work, but there's a mistrust there. There's territory issues,
yeah,
and the NATO, the security agreement issue.
Yeah.
Which I don't see them joining NATO at this point.
No, and I would never trust a Russian or a communist or a Russian autocrat like Putin either. So you just keep your powder dry.
So yes, let's take a question from Mr. Coughlin. Go ahead.
Let me unmute. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Sanford, for the explanation. I'm curious in regard to the Budapest Memorandum. Are we not signatory to that in the United States as far as defending? We are.
Yeah.
How has this impacted our reputation in the region? As a diplomacy major, I was focused on very concerned about how this looks as far as the Ukrainian perspective, the Russian perspective, where we're supposed to be defending them, and if that agreement was broken, and we did not.
No, what can I say is the perception of the United States, I think, is not that great as far as honoring commitments. I can point to a half dozen examples where we've made deals and we've decided to bail out Afghanistan.
Yeah, we weren't finished. But yeah, so, I couldn't agree with you more. Actually, what you said was when I was reading about the Budapest Memorandum, I questioned the same thing. How are we going to look if we pull out and we don't defend Ukraine?
It's up to Ukraine to make sure that they stay strong, and it's up to the West Europeans more than it is the Americans. But I agree with Mr. Conklin that we signed a deal and we broke it. The UK signed a deal, they broke it. And of course, the Russians broke it, but that to me is no big surprise. And actually, it's a lesson for Iran too, because Ukraine gave up the nukes. If they had not given up the nuclear weapons, then I suspect Russia wouldn't have been so quick to invade Ukraine. And I think Iran is saying the same thing. If we have nukes, you guys won't fool around with us so much. So
yeah, I was thinking that too, Larry. Actually, them giving up the nukes definitely would have been a deterrence.
Yeah. So
any other questions from our crowd? Well, I also noticed yesterday that, speaking, Larry, about alliances with European nations, there was an update yesterday that more than 30 nations, mostly European NATO nations, but also Ireland, Cyprus, and Austria, it looks like, and some Asian Pacific nations, all were getting together to talk about some sort of security agreement or peace agreement for Ukraine without the United States.
The Class of Civilizations by Samuel Huntington is slowly evolving, and I can envision that the EU, European Union, is going to gradually evolve into a separate empire away from the Western empire of the United States and the English-speaking part of the world. And I guess it's a sense like 1984, you had the separate empires in the English-speaking world, the European mass, and so forth. So I can see the Europeans getting together in many respects and evolving more independence from the United States. But right now they depend upon the United States for their military security. So, yeah, I hope they evolve.
And I think Trump hopes so too. I mean, this seems like he was pushing for that to happen. So hopefully they put up more of their GDP toward.
I mean, we have
military
thousands
deterrence.
and thousands of troops in Western Europe and Germany in particular. I think our welcome is long overdue.
Yes.
We have 100 bases altogether all over the world. In this day and age of hypersonic weapons and forwarding bases, I just don't see why we keep all these bases. I don't see why we keep big aircraft carriers that are just sitting ducks for nuclear tipped missiles and drones. I don't see how they could survive. There's a lot of things I don't understand.
I'd be cautious on the numbers, Mr. Sanford.
Call me
What's
Larry.
considered okay, Larry. Good, I'm Jason. The number of bases, they say 100 abroad. It's actually, I think the last number I got was like 400 and some. How many of those are actual bases? Because there may be multiple commands on one base. In the
Yes.
case of like Ramstein, I think has 30 or something like that. That's not 30 bases, but then it does add 30 to that number.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's an inflationary figure. It's made to scare people. I think it's I want to say there were 30 air bases in Europe at the fall of the Berlin Wall. Today, I think there's 5 left. When I was at Ramstein, I was at Sembach. There were 5.
Okay.
So it's down. It's substantial. So most of them are just pretty much logistic hubs to support forward operation somewhere else. As far as like actually securing the European continent, I don't think we've been as made. Well, we've definitely economically, yes, because when you live in a foreign country, you spend money there, and you know it's quite a bit too. It's not a large small number of people. So
So how many American soldiers and airmen and navymen are based in Europe then?
I want to say that last that's my data's data. I want to say 30 or 40,000 was the last number I got.
That would be my guess too. Yeah.
Yeah, it's between you got the Sigonella, Naples, and I don't know if Rota's still open. I think Rota's still open, Rota, Spain. And then you've got Spangdahlem, Sembach, are the air bases, Grafenwehr, Stuttgart, Ramstein, Lakenheath and Menwith Hill.
And
Are
now and we're moving troops into Poland and like also we have facilities in Poland too, right?
We've had okay, so those are augmentations. In other words, not actually U.S. bases per se. So like Ramstein's a NATO agreed base, and there's the status of forces agreement for that base. Whereas in Poland, it's actually U.S. troops, permanently living at or positioned at a forward base. In that case, so it's not really a U.S. installation per se.
Gotcha. Understood. Okay. So we are in a lot of places, though. That's for sure.
Oh yeah, well, no doubt about that. It's true.
Yeah.
We got Guantanamo Bay, of course. You got I think the island in the Indian Ocean is going back to the Maldives, or I forget whoever the governing authorities close by.
Yeah, I was
Garcia
just
Atoll,
reading about that.
Yeah, but that's 50 years out or 90 years out. Now who knows what's going to happen then? So
Well, I think our base is the base itself will remain, but
Yeah.
the actual custody of the island will go over to whoever.
yeah, the Maldives.
Hmm.
So,
So question for everyone. So the minerals deal that was not a part of the Saudi Arabia talks yesterday, apparently nothing's been signed. I thought that actually was a pretty good move to try to get a minerals deal that would actually give security to Ukraine in a sense that if America is going to invest in it, they're going to want to make sure that there's not a war zone they're going into if they're going to put investors there or businesses. Any thoughts?
I'm curious. I didn't get the details on that. Was there? And I wish I could have read more about this to understand. I knew. I'm trying to stay away from I try to stay away from social media or sensational media. What was actually agreed upon? I was always curious how Russia would handle this, because I mean, you got to figure Russia's all their pipelines are going under Ukraine.
Right.
Or to get in, and I mean, if our pipelines went through Mexico and Mexico is going to join the Warsaw Pact, snowballs, we wouldn't hesitate for 5 seconds to take it over. So we'd find some justification quickly. So I didn't blame Russia for doing what they did. And in Ukraine, when I was there, it was notoriously corrupt, and it was pretty blatant too. It wasn't anything they made secretive. How will their own minerals resources? How will that be governed? How effectively? And then what's going to happen with with those resources once mined? Who actually owns them? and so on, because are they going to go through Russian infrastructure to get moved and shipped if we're talking like natural gas, oil in their pipeline, so on.
Good points.
Well,
And I believe there was some sort of 50% to the US of mineral rights, but as Larry and I were discussing, I mean, that's going to take some time. First of all, they're not even sure exactly what's underground. It hasn't been looked at in years. We do believe there's rare earth minerals there. Definitely lithium, I understand, in the Russia now controlled Eastern Ukraine parts. But there's no, I didn't see what the actual whole thing entailed in the minerals deal.
Mhm.
It seemed like it was a way for Trump to offer a deal to Ukraine that would then have US invested interest in securing Ukraine.
if I read it correctly, excuse me, if I read it correctly, the sticking point that the guy had was he did not get a security of assurance from President Trump, and that's why he didn't sign the deal. He said, we have this mineral deal, but you're not assuring us that you'll secure our country. That's what I read. I don't know.
Yes, I read that too. But my assumption, and this is why I'm posing the question, my assumption would be we're not going to send US business, or US businesses aren't going to want to go into a war zone or something that's unstable.
Yeah.
So there have to be a vested interest there.
And Trump is not going to sign a security deal at this time. So
No, probably not.
his position is if we have American business in there, one can assume that we'll protect them, but we're not going to formalize the deal. So I think he's doing everything he can to make Putin sign the ceasefire. But if Putin doesn't sign a ceasefire, who knows what Trump will do?
I'm guessing more restrictions will come on.
Yeah, more military support. Yeah, I agree. No, and the war in drones, we mentioned this before, the drones. Ukraine just sent a massive drone attack on Moscow. I mean, that's going to shake up the natives a little bit with the fact that they're now being attacked by air. So I'm sure that there's some soul searching going on right now.
But we told them if they gave up their nukes in the 90s that we would have a special deal to protect them. Why should they make a deal with us now if we might just renege on it in the next 4 years?
Ron, I don't have a clue as to I don't have a clue. But
I questioned that myself.
It is a disheartening thing to even think about, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's a diplomacy nightmare. It's a diplomacy nightmare. If I don't work in diplomacy, but if I was, I'd be really like, okay, what leg do I have to stand on in trying to get someone to see things from my point of view?
Yeah.
It would be very difficult,
Yeah.
if not impossible.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, from the 1994 agreement, Ukraine shouldn't have to give up any of their territory.
So anybody have any thoughts on this? I'd love to have.
Well, that also reinforces Iran to say, yeah, we want nukes.
Yeah.
So that doesn't help us there either.
No, I agree.
But
You have
America, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I thought Iran did have nukes, if I'm not mistaken. Is that not the case?
They have the enrichment, or the ability to. I don't know if it's been confirmed.
Yeah, I suspect they do, and they're just not saying they do. But we'll find out soon enough, one way or the other. But then again, there's plenty of countries out there that have nukes that are a real threat. North Korea, Pakistan. So who knows? And you could put a nuclear weapon in a suitcase or a container ship and send it into New York Harbor, and who the heck knows? Or a biological weapon. It's a dangerous place we have in the world.
I think I heard that France is planning on sending tactical nukes to Germany, and Germany's going to use drones as a defensive measure. I think I read that.
Would Germany actually fly the drones into Ukraine?
Well, not for the Ukraine, but for the future.
Oh, I see. It's part of a joint.
The next conflict, yeah.
I get you. Okay.
That's curious. I thought France is a non-military portion of NATO, I thought.
They withdrew, but I thought they came back.
I need to get caught up on some reading. But
yeah, me too. Me too.
in a while. I mean, it's all curious points to consider. And I get, from an investment standpoint, I wonder, where I would, I'd be skeptical, but at the same time, tapping very, very cheap resources. I've had web designers in the Ukraine. I've had graphic artists in the Ukraine work. And I've hired them on freelance sites online. They do great work. They're very inexpensive, relatively speaking, and they're happy usually to take, most happy to take money, but they're happy to work for a lot less than what we would pay for here. And thanks to the internet, they're able to work remotely.
Yeah.
I found when the war had first started, I remember sitting on a Zoom meeting just like this, and one of the guys sitting there, a rocket went right. You can see the windows open, and the rocket hit across the street. And he says, "Excuse me." He gets up and he slams the window shut and says, "Bloody Russians!" And he just keeps right on typing. Now I would have been like probably having a breakdown. I had like, "Where's the basement? Oh, I get the heck out of here." He didn't care. And I thought, to live like that's rather impressive, I guess, that you can be so nonchalant, so they're very resilient people is the point I'm getting at. And this was, I even said, "Aren't you a little nervous?" He goes, "It was same in 2014." He says to me, I was like, "All right, well, I guess if you're used to that." So it was extremely awkward. I said, because I told him, I said, "Do you have to get going to get your family safe or whatever?" He goes, "No, we'll be fine." Like, okay. So that there's literal. I mean, the worst thing that would happen in my case, paying him or his, actually he had a team. Was that okay? If one of them was killed or something like that, I didn't lose any money per se. I mean, the project wouldn't be complete, but I didn't invest anything in like infrastructure. I didn't own their computers or their buildings or any assets or anything like that. But I was able to tap the resource as from labor perspective very, very inexpensively. So it was great. I think that will continue for sure.
I think it's in America's interest that the Ukraine survive, and the Russians are not going to give up land unless the U.S. gets involved, and Russia's not going to take over Ukraine because the West won't allow it to happen. So we really need some sort of Korea kind of armistice to stop the fighting, where Russia benefits and the West benefits. So let's hope it happens. I mean,
Maybe they're afraid of this big.
Yeah, Eisenhower had to threaten to use nuclear weapons to get the North Koreans to the deal. So.
Do you see this getting to the point where Ukraine becomes the new Iron Curtain, splitting it in half or something like that? We're gonna have like a Berlin Wall kind of situation where you're on that side, we're on this side, but here's how we're going to maintain this strict joint control with a really huge anti-fascist barriers in the middle.
Yeah, just like the Mexican border, right?
Yeah,
big border. Yeah, I see that happening. But as you mentioned, the pipelines and all the commerce that goes back and forth. So more trade doesn't necessarily mean that the government is going to become more liberal or democratic. That's for sure. And China's a perfect example of that.
Well, my observation of these countries, I mean, especially Eastern countries in general, they're capitalist in the sense they've got some economic freedom, but they're purely, the whole system, especially China, is purely consumeristic. And that it's a consumerist machine. It's driven on just extract whatever resources you can get, nutrients out of the ground or minerals and so forth, turn them into something that someone's willing to buy, and then off it goes. And then that seems to be the same way the Eastern countries like the Ukraine in general, they all think the same along the same lines. I'm curious what China's got, that kind of dynamic or that kind of character of player doesn't see things the way we do. And that's I've seen this in diplomacy. The worst thing we ever do. Everyone thinks in America that the West, or actually the rest of the world, thinks that we do the way we do, and no, they don't at all. Yeah. And we think at a very free market kind of freedom mindset, in the sense of like free thinking, free thought, and free ways in which we go about doing things. Whereas they want their comfort, peace, and security, and at any cost. So it's a completely different inverse of what we're used to.
Yes.
So, I get nervous when I see the complacency or for lack of a better word, naivete. Yuri Bezmenov warned about all this stuff. This is none of this is new, and I think the propaganda war is really, really intensified, if anything. Yeah,
I'm a big believer in the gray zone and soft power, Voice of America kind of stuff. Let's hope Voice of America preaches pro-Western propaganda, not anti-Western propaganda, as it seems to be doing in some instances. So I believe in all that internet kind of stuff. And we're really running astray here. But as Joy knows, TikTok is one of my favorite bugaboos. And my Wall Street Journal this morning came with a huge advertisement from TikTok and how it's serving 7 million American businesses. TikTok is a threat to national security. And why anyone would allow a Communist Party apparatus propaganda machine to operate freely in America is beyond my comprehension.
I think at the time, no one knew what his influence would be.
Yeah.
You
I
didn't,
know.
you didn't see the animal coming.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We
there's a
do
lot of
now.
people that
Yeah.
profit from TikTok, and I haven't done one myself, but I've got a venture I'm working on right now that very well my people handle my social media. I don't TikTok itself is not inherently evil; it's people behind it. You know, the mechanism that it uses, the manner in which it delivers its content, and the way in which it enables people to get their talent broadcast to an audience is very effective and actually really nice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it just happens to feed data to someone we don't like. So
Well,
if that aspect could be split, you know, I'm in favor of maybe like splitting it off where an
Yeah,
American company owns it. And
Trump is working on that angle, as you know, trying to get BlackRock to buy him for 20 or 40 billion, some number, so that Americans own the organization. If that's the case, fine. But it's controlled by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and the logarithms drive Americans into anti-Western, anti-American rabbit holes and builds up how great the Communist Party is in China. So that to me is a security issue.
I agree.
Well, thank you guys for joining us today. It's little 2:35, I guess, about. So Larry, I appreciate that. Take on Ukraine.
Thank you,
Appreciate
guys.
all your input today from everyone.
Thank you all. And
On
nice
our
to
Peace
see you,
Through
Jason.
Strength global leadership. We'll see how things go with peace, democracy in Ukraine as we move forward. Join us
Thank you.
again next time. Thank you all.